The story in this video is taken from the book Journeying with the Prophets, chapter 14. Please like and share our video and subscribe to our channel. His early life. The Holy Prophet was born in Mecca in Arabia on 12 Rabi al-Awwal. His mother's name was Amina and his father's name was Abdullah and grandfather was Abu Muttalib. All the prophets, but one after the time of Prophet Ibrahim, came from the lineage of Ishaq. He was the son of Prophet Ibrahim and Sarah. But Allah decided that the last and final prophet will come from Bani Ishmael, the first child of Prophet Ibrahim and his second wife Hajra. Prophet Muhammad's father died before he was born. At that time, it was customary for the children born in Mecca to be cared for by babysitters who lived by the hillside. It was a nicer, cleaner environment to raise kids. The Prophet's sitter was called Halima. Halima loved the Prophet very much and she brought him up with much love and care. One day when he was a young boy, something very strange happened. Two angels visited him, opened his chest, took his heart out and washed it with Zamzam water. They then put it back in its position. "Goodness!" exclaimed Layla. "Did it hurt? Why did they do that?" Nanny told the children that the Prophet felt no pain, and his heart was washed to prevent any influence from the shaitan. Prophet Isa and Maryam also by the permission of Allah could not be influenced by the shaitan. Halima was very scared and the Prophet was retuned to his mother. Unfortunately, she passed away when he was 6 years old. Prophet Muhammad was now in the care of his grandfather Abu Muttalib. When he died 2 years later, the Prophet's uncle Abu Talib took charge of him. The young Prophet was a very happy child and accompanied his uncle on many of his journeys. On one visit when he was 12 years old they went to a place called Bisra. They visited a monk called Bahira who saw some very special qualities in the young boy. His exact words were, "Return with this child and guard him against the Jews. A great career awaits your nephew." Abu Talib was quite puzzled by the wise old monk's words and shrugged it off. He felt that his nephew was just an ordinary child. The young Prophet stood out from the people of Mecca. He had such impeccable qualities. He was pious, truthful, had good manners. There was no other child like him in Mecca. Everyone liked him and called him Al-Amin. This means the trustworthy. His uncle, although from a noble tribe, was not wealthy, and the Prophet helped him to take care of his flock of sheep. The people at that time in Mecca was very ignorant. That period was referred to as the period of Jahiliyyah, the period of ignorance. The people were very bad and didn't care very much for the laws of the land. As always, it was the wealthy ones who were the oppressors. This grieved the Prophet immensely. One day, on a journey to Syria, he met a very wealthy widow called Khadijah. She was a very noble and pious woman from a wealthy family. She was also a very smart businesswoman. She was a widow and many men wanted to marry her, but she refused all of them. She was so impressed by the Prophet's honesty and knowledge and impeccable noble character that she offered him a job. On his first business trip he was accompanied by one of Khadijah's servants. On their return, the wealthy widow wanted some feedback of the trip. What was related impressed her so much. He told her of the kindness of the Prophet and the clouds following that shaded them as they traveled the desert. He went on to tell her of his good business dealings. He sold the goods that she gave him, and with the profits he bought other merchandise which he resold, doubling the profits. She was so impressed by him, and although at 15 years older than him wanted to marry him. The next day she sent her sister to ask for his hand in marriage. The Prophet was very surprised that such a wealthy woman with such beauty and nobility, the one who refused so many, wanted to marry him. He was only a poor shepherd. Soon after the Prophet and Khadijah were married. The Prophet lived a very happy, fulfilling life for many years. When he was 35 years old something very momentous happened. The Kaaba needed rebuilding. All the tribes wanted to take charge of this job. It was a very difficult decision to choose. One wise, old man stood up and said, "You will listen to the first man that entered that gate," pointing to its direction. The people agreed and patiently waited with eyes fixed at the gate. The first one to enter was the prophet, who people referred to as the Alamin. All the different tribes were consulting with him. After a while, the prophet came to a decision. He informed that a cloth should be placed under the stone and each tribe should carry it by holding a part of the cloth. Everyone agreed to this. The result was that all the tribes participated in the rebuilding of the Kaaba. It was at that time a person named Usman ibn Harith arrived in Mecca. He tried to tempt the people by using Byzantine gold so that they will become dependent on the Roman government. Fortunately, his plan was foiled because the Prophet intervened and warned the people of Mecca. The Prophet was very sympathetic to the poor and their needs, helping them as much as he can. There was an instance when his uncle fell on hard times. Prophet Muhammad cleared all his debts for him. Abu Talib had a son named Ali. The Prophet took very good care of him and saw to all his needs, including his education. Ali went on later to marry the Prophet's daughter Fatima. A year later, the Prophet received his first revelations. When the Prophet was 40 years old, he used to escape his city to meditate in a cave on Mount Hira. They were very barbaric people, addicted to superstition and idol worshipping. They were always fighting with each other. He will sometimes spend the nights there as well, in deep concentration. Then one day, the Prophet experienced something amazing, but it also frightened him. He was visited by Angel Jibreel. He squeezed him and commanded the Prophet to read. But he was an unlettered prophet and did not know how to read. The angel then started to squeeze him and ordered him to read once more, but the Prophet still could not read. On the third time the angel told him to repeat after him. This was the first revelation. This surah is called Al-Alaq and it's the 96th surah of the Quran. He repeated the following. Recite in the name of your Lord who created created man from a clinging substance. Recite, and your Lord is the most generous. Who taught by the pen? Taught man that which he knew not. The Prophet repeated each word, trembling with fear. He was still trembling when he arrived home, much to the astonishment of his wife Khadijah. He asked her to wrap him up. She wrapped him in a towel until he was trembling no more. He felt that he was going mad, but his wife reassured him that Allah will not let such a thing happen to him. Khadijah went to consult with her cousin about the Prophet's experience. He was old and blind and was well versed in the scriptures. He cried out saying that the angel was the same Holy Spirit that came to Prophet Musa and went on to say that he will be a prophet to his people. The Prophet continued to receive revelations from Allah. As these came down, he will ask his companions to write them down on sheepskin and then read them back to him, ensuring it's written down correctly. For the first 3 years the Prophet only preached to close friends and family. The first person to accept Islam was his wife Khadijah, then Zayd, followed by his friend, Abu Bakr. Then it was time to take Islam to the public. The Prophet took Islam to the public. Nanny asked the children if they had any questions before she continues. The children had no questions and were eager for her to continue the story. Even after 3 years, the Prophet only had 30 followers. Allah commanded him to take Islam to the public. The people of Mecca at that time worshipped idols. The Kaaba was full of these. When the Prophet took his message public, he incurred the wrath of the tribal leaders who saw him as a great threat. Not only did he condemn idol worshipping, but he told that everyone is equal in the sight of Allah. Such preaching really challenged the local priests and tribal leaders. They were great oppressors of the poor. They started plotting against him. They decided that each family should identify those followers of Islam and punish them in a tortuous way. The people were beaten, flogged and thrown into prison. The children gasped on hearing such cruelty. Layla wanted to know if they torture the Prophet as well. The Prophet was spared because he had the protection of his uncle Abu Talib, Nanny told the children. They tried to bribe him with lots of money to stop his preaching and join their religion. They offered to make him their chief and promised to consult with him on all matters. This message was conveyed by a messenger called Utbah. What did the Prophet say to him? Asked Aaron. The Prophet responded by reciting the first 13 verses of Surah Fussilat. Nani said, A revelation from Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. A book whereof the verses are explained in detail, a Quran in Arabic for people who know. Giving glad tidings, of paradise to the one who believes in the oneness of Allah, i.e. Islamic monotheism, and fears Allah much, abstains from all kinds of sins and evil deeds, and loves Allah much, performing all kinds of good deeds which He has ordained, and warning of punishment in the hellfire to the one who disbelieves in the oneness of Allah, but most of them turn away, so they listen not. And they say, our hearts are under coverings, screened, from that to which you invite us, and in our ears is deafness, and between us and you is a screen, so work you, on your way, verily, we are working, on our way. Say, O Muhammad, I am only a human being like you. It is inspired in me that your God is one God, Allah, therefore take straight path to Him, with true faith Islamic monotheism, and obedience to Him, and seek forgiveness of Him. And woe to the disbelievers in the oneness of Allah, polytheists, idolaters, etc. Those who give not the zakat, and they are disbelievers in the hereafter. Truly, those who believe in the oneness of Allah, Islamic monotheism, and in His Messenger Muhammad, and do righteous good deeds, for them will be an endless reward that will never stop. Say, O Muhammad, do you verily disbelieve in Him who created the earth in 2 days, and you set up rivals, in worship, with Him? That is the Lord of the mankind, jinns and all that exists. He placed therein, i.e., the earth, firm mountains from above it, and He blessed it, and measured therein its sustenance, for its dwellers, in 4 days equal, i.e. all these 4 days were equal in the length of time, for all those who ask about its creation. Then He rose over towards the heaven when it was smoke, and said to it and to the earth, Come both of you willingly or unwillingly. They both said, We come, willingly. Then He completed and finished from their creation, as 7 heavens in 2 days, and He made in each heaven its affair. And we adorned the nearest, lowest, heaven with lamps, stars, to be an adornment as well as to guard, from the devils by using them as missiles against the devils. Such is the decree of Him the Almighty, the All-Knower. But if they turn away, then say, O Muhammad, I have warned you of the Sekher, a destructive awful cry, torment, hit, a thunderbolt like the Sekher which overtook Ad and Thamud people. The Prophet then related to him about what had happened to the people of Ad and Thamud. Hence, that's the Prophet's reply to Utbah's proposition. When this plan failed, they approached Abu Talib to ask his nephew to stop preaching to the people. The Prophet gave this beautiful response to his uncle. If they were to put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left to stop preaching Islam, I will never stop. Abu Talib loved the Prophet very much and told him to continue preaching, and he will never desert him. The first Hijra migration. Despite the torture and oppression, many more people were joining the religion of Islam. At that time there was a very kind Christian king, Al-Najashi, ruling Abyssinia. When the persecution became unbearable, the Prophet advised them to emigrate to Abyssinia. This country is now called Ethiopia. To avoid detection, only 15 families migrated initially. This was called the first Hijra in Islam and happened in the 5th year of the Prophet's mission. They were received very kindly and many others followed later. The number of migrants soon reached 100. The leaders in Mecca eventually realized what was happening and they were furious and decided to act. They sent 2 delegates to the king and requested that all migrants be returned to Mecca. The king decided to hold a court and the fugitives were summoned. Their spokespersons were Jabbar and Ali, sons of Abu Talib. They explained the conditions they were living in because they refused to worship idols and believed in one God. They told him about the Prophet and his message. They spoke very well, pleading their cause to the king. He was very sympathetic and asked the delegates to return to their land and not to interfere with the migrants. The Prophet continued receiving revelations from Allah and continued to spread the message of Islam. The people started asking him for signs from Allah. He responded by telling that Allah had not sent him to perform miracles but to preach Islam. He told them that all the prophets came with various miracles and yet the people returned to disbelief. The Quran tells us in 17 places in where the prophet was challenged to show signs and each time he gave the same answer. Nothing seemed to be working, and Abu Talib was approached again to abandon his nephew. But although a non-believer himself, he stood by his nephew. The story of how Umar ibn al-Khattab became Muslim. Umar belonged to the Qurayshi tribe and was a great oppressor of Islam. He was a very influential person in his tribe and the Prophet prayed that he would accept the message. One day he went fully armed looking for the Prophet. He wanted to kill him. As he was approaching Mount Safa where the Prophet and his followers were assembled, he was stopped by one of his tribesmen, Nu'aym ibn Abdullah. Nu'aym noticed his sword hanging from his neck and his aggressiveness. So he asked him where he was going. His response was, "I seek for Muhammad," was Umar's reply, "and I will slay him. He has forsaken our religion, shattered the unity of the Quraysh, ridiculed them and vilified their gods. Today I will settle the matter once and for all." Nu'aym himself had secretly embraced Islam and informed Umar that his own sister Fatima bint al-Khattab and her husband, Sa'd ibn Zayd, were also Muslims. Seething with anger, Umar made a detour to confront the couple. Umar immediately hurried on to the house of his sister. On approach he could hear the recitation of Surah Taha, 20th chapter of the Quran. When Fatima heard the footsteps of her brother, she quickly hid the manuscript. But he had already heard the recitation and demanded, "What was this nonsense murmur that I heard? I know that both of you have joined the sect of Muhammad." With these words, Umar threw himself upon his brother-in-law. Fatima rushed in to save her husband, but Umar struck her hard and wounded her. The brave couple were not afraid and confronted Umar by asserting, "Yes, we are Muslims, we believed in Allah and His Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, do whatever you will." Umar felt so ashamed of his actions when he saw the blood pouring out of his sister's mouth and asked them to show him the manuscript of Surah Taha. Fatima replied that only the pure can touch these words of Allah and he was impure from polytheism. Umar took a bath, and only after reading a few lines, he exclaimed in amazement, "How noble and sublime is this speech!" Umar left his sister's house and rushed to the Prophet. The Prophet and the followers thought he had come to hurt them. The Prophet very respectfully asked the purpose of his visit, to which he replied, "I have come to declare that I believe in one God and you are his messenger." Umar has now become a follower of Islam. Umar proclaimed his faith publicly and his reversion had a miraculous effect on the people of Mecca. The number of followers of Islam grew and so was the hatred of the non-believers. The leaders imposed a total ban on contact with the Prophet's family. They had to leave Mecca. During this period the Prophet and his companions remained indoors, resulting in the lack of progress of Islam. The ban on the Prophet's family was lifted after 3 years and he returned to Mecca. The following year was a very sad year for the Prophet. He lost both his wife Khadija and uncle Abu Talib. The children had been quiet for quite a while, until Layla spoke. "I am so worried now for the Prophet because his uncle protected him from the enemies and his wife supported him in all of his mission." It was indeed a very difficult time for the Prophet. It was reported that he said of this time, "Quraysh never harmed me so much as after the death of Abu Talib." Whenever he saw his daughter, Fatima, cry at the insults and harm he endured, he would tell her, "Do not cry, O Fatima. Your father has Allah for his protector." There was a very pious woman named Sauda who had emigrated with her husband to Abyssinia during the first Hijrah. When her husband died, she returned to Mecca. She sought shelter with the Prophet's ascension to heaven. Nanny Serena ensured she has all the children's attention because she wanted to tell them about this marvelous journey that the Prophet made. It was in the night. The Prophet was fast asleep when Angel Jibreel paid him a visit. He was going to prepare him to make a very important journey in his life. He opened his chest and washed his heart with Zamzam water. He then emptied a vessel made of gold containing wisdom and faith into the Prophet's heart. This is to prepare him for the journey. To make this journey he bought a beautiful horse with wings. His name is Borak. Jibreel offered the Prophet 2 cups from which to drink, one containing milk and the other containing wine. The Prophet chooses to drink the milk. Jibreel tells him, "Praise be to Allah who guided you to the fitra, right path." The Borak carries the Prophet to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. The first part of the journey is called Isra. At Masjid al-Aqsa he finds 3 very important prophets. Prophets Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa. Peace and blessings be upon them all. The Prophet led them in salah there. The second part of journey is called the Miraj. In this journey the Prophet was taken to each of the 7 heavens. This is what happened. The next part of the journey is marked by Prophet Muhammad's ascension to the heavens. Here, all the laws of nature and the concepts of time and space as we know cease to apply, and everything the Prophet experiences and sees is beyond human comprehension. At each of the 7 heavens, the Prophet accompanied by Jibril, encounters a gate and a watcher. At the gate of the lowest heaven, Jibril asks the gatekeeper to open the gate. The gatekeeper asks, "Who is it?" "It is Jibril," he answers. The gatekeeper says, "Who is accompanying you?" Jibril says, "It is Muhammad." The gatekeeper then says, "Has he been called?" Jibril says, "Yes." The gatekeeper says, "He is welcomed." What a wonderful visit this is. The Prophet proceeded to visit all 7 levels of heaven, and the same questions were asked and the same answers given. At every heaven, he met with a Prophet. In the first heaven he encountered Prophet Adam, who greeted him with delight. The Prophet gave him his salams and the reply was, "Welcome my son, welcome O Prophet of Allah." In the second heaven he met Prophets Isa and Yahya, Yusuf in the third heaven, Idris in the fourth heaven, Harun in the fifth heaven, Musa in the sixth heaven, and finally Ibrahim, the father of prophets, in the 7th heaven. "What an absolutely remarkable journey," exclaimed Layla. Taking a deep breath, Musa spoke. "This journey is beyond human comprehension." During this journey he is shown the Bait al-Mamur, the Qibla of the angels, that sits above the Kaaba, and scenes from paradise and hell. In the next dimension through the 7th heaven he saw the Sidrat al-Muntaha, the lote tree, whose fruits are as big as jugs and its leaves as big as elephant ears. Here, Jibreel asks the Prophet to proceed alone. No one from among all of Allah's creation has ever gone beyond Sidrat al-Muntaha. Here he had a conversation with Allah. Did he actually see Allah? Asked Aaron. Nani replied that no one has never seen Allah, but the Prophet converse with him at a distance. During this meeting Allah informed the Prophet that his Ummah must pray 50 times per day. On descending, the Prophet told Prophet Musa about this. He suggested to the Prophet to return to Allah and ask for less. This the Prophet did, and finally he was told that we must pray 5 times a day and will receive the reward of 50. Subhanallah, said Seth. Indeed, Allah is so merciful. This remarkable journey has now ended and the Prophet is on his way back to earth. On his descent he saw a caravan en route heading towards Mecca, with a lost camel that the traders were looking for. The Prophet informed everyone of his remarkable journey. The disbelievers ridiculed him and accused him of lying. As the Prophet had never visited Masjid al-Aqsa, he was asked for its description. He gave a very detailed description. He also described the caravan he saw en route, and even when this was proven to be accurate, the disbelief continued. They even accused the Prophet of insanity. Islam started spreading rapidly after this, much to the fury of the disbelievers. They made their mind up that the Prophet should be killed. Their plan was that one man will be chosen from each of their tribes, and they will attack the Prophet simultaneously. But Allah sent an angel to inform the Prophet and told the Prophet to leave Mecca for Medina. This he did with his trusted companion Abu Bakr. They went south of Mecca to the mountain cave of Thawr and then traveled north to Medina. They foiled all attempts from the disbelievers and arrived safely in Medina. The people gave a warm welcome to the Prophet. The people living in Mecca also gradually made that move to Medina. The Prophet settled in Medina and made it a state. He continued to receive revelations from Allah to guide the people how to live. Islam started spreading fast to the neighboring lands, and many rulers and their countries accepted Islam. Today, Islam is the second largest religion in the world, and the prediction that it will be the largest by the year 2070.